Vita Carnis is a very gross and unsettling analog horror series that so far has raised thousands of questions and provided absolutely no answers. So today I thought I would go through the series and we'll start to break down what exactly is going on in the world of Vita Carnis. Roughly translated from Latin, Vita Carnis means living flesh or living meat. The first half of the Vita Carnis story is a documentary from the Living Meat Society about the Vita Carnis creatures. So the first thing you might see when you come to the channel is that there's certain things on here that aren't along with the analog horror series. The series is made by Darian Quilloy. I hope I said that right. And he is an artist who makes kind of disturbing looking art, and he's got a couple of speed paints and tutorials on how to draw on his channel. However, along with that is the entire Vita Carnis series. If you go over to the playlist section, the series is just listed out there in a playlist for you in order, and you can watch it from there. Each creature has its own separate video, however they were all combined into one 30-minute documentary about the Vita Carnis. So let's just get into the documentary. Each video, and at the beginning of the documentary, we are greeted with this card that states that all this footage is federally owned and illegal to watch. You will get a minimum of like a $500,000 fine if you are seen watching it, distributing it, or anything like that, if not jail time. Most likely jail time. So we know that this does not take place within Earth proper, or within our actual timeline. This is an alternate history type of timeline that we're dealing with. The Vita Carnis creatures are these fleshy, meat-like creatures that have inhabited the planet and taken over. They've come up seemingly from nowhere. There's debate as to whether or not they're aliens or demons. However, all research has proven that they are perfectly organic and have seemingly just popped up out of nowhere. Specifically in 1931, and the populations have skyrocketed from there. This documentary is put together by the National Living Meat Research Cooperation, which is a very just odd thing to say. And all of the creatures of the Vita Carnis stem from something called the crawl. So before we get into the other creatures, let's dissect what the crawl is. The crawl is growths of red, fleshy tendrils that grow like fungus or vines, like you would see on the side of an old building, or like fungus around a tree, something of that sort. It is red and meaty, and there are veins and vessels that run throughout them.
Its recent inclusion in the ecosystem has caused many major changes in nature's balance. One may assume that the crawl's presence may outcompete any other competitors, but due to its unique life cycle, where old branches fall off and decay into nutrient-rich compost, all forms of life seemingly flourish instead. The crawl's abundance grants plenty of nourishment to all animals, from plants feeding on the decayed crawl, herbivores thriving on increased plant population, and carnivores feeding on both the abundant prey, and are able to eat the crawl as well.
The crawl can be found anywhere in the world, and the humans of the world, not to be outdone, have cultivated the crawl.
Because of the supernatural rate of growth and its richness in nutrients, it has been sustainably
little nodes of meat that grow on the crawl, and those can pop off and form into independent little creatures. Some of them not so little and not so fun. The first of these creatures is called the trimming, or the trimmings, and these are like little skinned raccoons is how they're described. They're no bigger than a basketball. They're harmless, they're pretty docile, they're scavengers, so they feed off of dead material or trash or things like this. Essentially they're just raccoons.
All individual trimmings are unique, each with a different body shape, number of limbs, and other characteristics.
The trimmings mature extremely fast. From node to maturity is roughly 7 months, and they live to be about 2 to 4 years old. They're mostly considered pests. However, some humans have adopted them as pets.
Because of its lack of defensive traits, it lies near the bottom of the food chain, making it easily overpowered and picked off very regularly by predators. Naturally, its population would eventually die out, but this is not the case.
The next animal in the chain is the meat snake. The meat snake video is actually the first Vita Carnis video on Darian Quilloy's on the channel. It was the first one I saw when I was recommended to watch this. This was my first exposure to Vita Carnis, and the meat snake might be the grossest one on here. So just, if you don't like gross stuff, Don't watch the rest of this video. Meat snakes resemble large snake or worm-like creatures. Their body is made up of a fleshy, meat-like substance, and these things are just basically giant living garbage disposals. Meat snakes are the only Vita Carnis that can reproduce.
When a meat snake reaches an excessive size, and is in the conditions to do so, it will commence mitosis, splitting itself in two. Then the now two meat snakes will go on their separate ways and live on as two distinct organisms.
So that's comforting. Meat snakes are very tame and appear to be used in many useful ways.
Once it locates the corpse, the meat snake will open its jaw and swallow the entire body whole. Once the entire body is consumed, the meat snake's stomach will release a variety of chemicals. Some will break down soft tissue like skin, and the connection points between muscles. Others chemicals will then ferment and preserve the tissue to keep it from breaking down for as long as possible. After that, the remaining flesh and bones will move along the meat snake's tract, and slowly be implemented into its own structure, extending the meat snake. Unsatisfactory parts like skulls, pelvises, hair, and fingernails will be excreted. Speaking of skulls, the meat snake will take the skull from the consumed organism and use it as its own. Each meat snake has its own skull, each corresponding to what that one has consumed. During its lifespan, it will swap or replace these skulls if needed. A meat snake's lifespan depends entirely on how much a meat snake consumes. The longest one has lived for was 28 years.
Next up, we have the mimics. And this is the worst thing you will hear all day. Mimics are basically tall, humanoid things without skin and with bulging eyes and long, fleshy fingers. And they have this huge, uncanny smile with very, very sharp incisors making up the majority of their teeth. Pretty much ideal for feasting on living animals.
Mature mimic's diet is comprised entirely of human flesh.
To make this all even better, mimics can disguise themselves as regular human beings with certain kind of clothes, or hide and look like a mannequin, things like this. They stalk their prey, which is human beings, and wait for vulnerable times to attack. Usually, this is when they are sleeping.
Once the prey is within position, the mimic will advance silently until it is close enough. The mimic will then execute and immediately begin consumption. Once the mimic has had its fill, it will leave the scene, a fair distance away from the human population, and begin to digest its meal.
And other times, they will attack when you're awake. Hey, real quick, I'm about to show a clip, and it is the scariest jump scare I've ever seen of all time. Hands down, no movie beats it. The Exorcist 3 with the doctor scene, Insidious, Mulholland Drive, all those famous jump scares out the window. This is the scariest jump scare of all time. I have watched it 7 times. Each time I know it's coming, and it still makes me jump. None of the other jump scares I mentioned do that. This is horrifying. Just letting you know. Enjoy!
Once a human is in place, it will swiftly attack and kill the helpless target.
after the second stage of their lifespan, the mimics can take on two different routes. One is to sort of become more human, and they end up looking completely human and completely undistinguishable from other human beings around them. This allows them to more efficiently hunt and trick their prey, and that's terrifying. And also, there's another route that's even worse, where they can get bigger, their skin gets black, and they get this pale white face, and they get even taller. They start to lose some of their human characteristics. Yeah, this is like the apex predator of all apex predators. Mimics are bad news. Within the documentary, there is a instructional video on what to do if you encounter a mimic.
Here are the instructions.
1. Avoid going out alone if your location is known to have mimics, or there have been mimic sightings. 2. If you encounter a stationary mimic, seemingly unfazed by your presence, quietly leave the location and alert your local authorities. 3. If pursued by a mimic, get yourself into a position where you are able to flee. Mimics will rarely attack if a person has a clear escape route. 4. In the event that you have been cornered by a mimic, roll into the fetal position, protecting your neck, face, and vital organs from attack. Make as much noise as you can to alert any other people. 5. If you have a weapon, do not use it. A mimic is fairly resilient, and any strikes or shots on a mimic is not effective enough to bring it down in time. Instead, use it as a barrier between you and the mimic to block any attacks. 6. In a situation where a mimic is hunting in the immediate area, and is not aware of your position, hide somewhere low, like under a bed or behind other furniture. A mimic will not linger too long to search for prey, and will move on.
Be safe, and avoid any encounters with a mimic at all costs.
As we can see, a few of those things don't work because we saw the thing from earlier. I don't want to go back to it, but you know what I mean. The girl in the closet didn't work out for her very well. The next kind of creature is called the harvester. Now, unlike all the other creatures from the crawl, harvesters do not actually separate from the crawl. Rather, the node of meat that becomes a harvester grows from the crawl, doesn't separate, uses the tendrils of the crawl, grows its own, and shoots out big, long tendrils underground. And these tendrils contain spikes on the edges of them, and they will sit just below the ground, rather. And if they are stepped on by a creature, then toxins are released into the creature from the little spikes. Some spikes have a paralyzing toxin. Others have a toxin that will cause your blood not to coagulate, and so it won't clot, and so you'll just bleed out immediately. And both of those kinds of spikes stab the creature at the same time. Generally speaking, these things hunt large animals, but humans can get caught up in these things. And the documentary recommends that you do this.
Do not panic. Sudden movements may activate the tendrils and will inject you. Although a harvester is rather forgiving, do not risk any skittish movements. Remain calm.
And the documentary recommends that you throw a backpack at it and run. The next one is the host. Now, the host has a very, very terrifying appearance. Probably the second scariest looking one next to, I would say, the mimic. Nothing's going to be scarier than the mimic. That's awful. But the host is like a semi-humanoid kind of figure that kind of acts as like a tree almost, where it can bury itself in the ground. And it has these big spikes and these spores on its back. And it will release these spores, and bad things happen.
The spores released by a host is very dangerous when inhaled. A host will release a cloud of spores into the air, which will be picked up by wind and carried great distances. If an organism inhales the spores, the particles will find their way into the organism's brain and infect them. An infected organism will show no symptoms of infection right away, but a couple hours after infection, the infected organism's behavior and thought process will change. The first symptoms that appear are restlessness, sluggish movement, numbness of joints, and lack of coordination. Then more serious symptoms appear over time. These include dizziness, migraines, impaired speech, and trembles. If you, or someone you know show these symptoms, contact poison control or emergency services. After a total of 6 to 7 hours after infection, the organism will cease all activities they were previously doing and begin to walk. The direction the infected will walk is towards the host whose spores have been inhaled by the infected individual. If the infected makes their way to the host, they will kneel down in front of it, expose their vital organs, and the host will promptly gut and remove those organs. The host will consume them and discard the leftover scraps. However, if an infected organism doesn't reach the host within a 36-hour span or is treated for their infection, the effects will wear off and return back to normal.
Hosts also have no face, by the way. It's just like a flat, blank head, and like their neck opens up into a mouth. And if that's not scary enough, hosts can unroot themselves and move and find better places to feed on things. I know I kind of showed a lot of that one with the host, but I think the documentary tells it better than I can. So, I mean, first and foremost, as with all of my videos, please go check it out for yourself. The link will be below so you can check out the channel and watch Vita Carnis for yourself. Alright, well, it's time for this Lovecraftian nightmare. Next, we have the Monoliths. There are only 7 monoliths in the entire world. These are extremely new, even for the Vita Carnis, even though all of those are relatively new within the last 90 years. However, the monoliths are even newer. They only showed up in 1972. There are 7 of them, and they're standing in a circle at least 1.5 kilometers in diameter, and they are about 120 meters in height. I don't know what that works out to in American, but we're just going to go with 120 meters. That's tall.
What the monoliths do is simply stand and do nothing. The only activity documented that the monoliths have done was in during this period, they were extremely aggressive. When the group of were making their way to the city, the monolith that they had passes roared a deep bellow and swung its appendages at the team, completely wiping them out. When military vehicles were dispatched, once they got close enough top the monolith, it roared another call, this time releasing an EMP blast, completely knocking the vehicles out in the vicinity. Finally, long-distance rockets were fired and struck the creature. Although damaged, it regenerated at great speed and resumed its stance unscathed. Eventually, the area has been fenced off and is now restricted to all. Ever since, the monoliths stand silently, now only a grand spectacle of awe and mystery, only adding more questions to these meat beings.
And finally, the Vita Carnis series ends like this.
The last creature on this list is
the singularity is an orb comprised of a dark-colored mineral with hints of luminous colors within its core. The singularity is estimated to be 1 meter in diameter. The orb has several unique qualities that are not well understood. The singularity typically can be found suspended in air by an unseen force. There are also a variety of readings that have been documented coming from the orb itself. Various things like magnetic fields, energy signatures, and other pattern-like signals released by the singularity. The population of these creatures is unknown. Almost all info about the singularity is hidden or confiscated by officials. We were only able to receive one classified document about the singularity being held by
Now I know what you're thinking, but Soul Carney, did you not see like every time it would like flash there was like an image of some kind or something? Oh yeah, That is my biggest with this series, and in a good way. It's a very good. It's like I probably have more watch time in this series than actually exists within the series total, because so many times it does this like flash of like 0.005 seconds of a frame. I don't know how you even get it to flash that quickly, but it'll be like something, and you'll know it. You're like, oh, that was something, and you'll like go back and try to pause, and you'll keep going back. This guy's overall watch time on this series has got to be insane, because I have watched like 90% of it in 0.25 speed, and just like pausing it and unpausing it as quickly as I can, just to try to catch the frame and make it legible. Sometimes when you catch the frame, it's not legible. So I had to catch the frames, make them legible. I've taken screenshots of all of them, and here they are. Most of them are newspaper headlines. The first one we get is in the crawl video, and we get the headline that says this: radio tower overgrown with crawl. And I didn't really catch that one right, but I'm assuming that it's just a picture of a radio tower with crawl on it. The next one we get is in the trimmings video, and it says that there's a mass trimming infestation of about 400 plus trimmings found under an abandoned satellite dish. The next headline was in the meat snake video, and it said that the largest meat snake had been discovered in an underground railway, and from information that I know from later, it was during World War II, and they thought it had been fed bodies off of a battlefield. The snake was roughly 40 meters long, and then there's like a lot of redacted information, and then it just says cult activity. The next headline we see is family attacked by harvester, and we see that the authorities refused to do anything about the harvester. That is the last headline of all the newspapers, and I know what you're thinking. Hey, Soul Carney, you know, there was more than just that. At least if you've watched the series, you know there was more than just that. And yes, I know. Even more frustratingly, there are more subliminal hidden things at the end of each creature's spotlight, you know? And again, lots of 0.2x speed. It loses all like function as a video. I am just like hitting play and pause and play and pause and play and pause and just trying to get the, you know, thing. And I finally got all of them, and half of them I have no idea what they say. I watched the guy react, and he was able to pause on every one and give a good explanation and rundown. So rather than focusing deeply on what all of these say, I'm going to give a general idea of what I think these are. Here's what they look like. They're at the end of every video, and it seems to be telling a story of a prince who was lost at sea and finds a cave. And once he's in this cave, he's super injured, so he uses his magic and puts himself into a deep healing sleep. And while he sleeps, the world outside of the cave changes a lot. And during a time of hardship, these little forest creatures come into the cave and scavenge for food, and they find the prince in his healing sleep. And they recognize that he is a different creature and a very magical creature, and that they wonder if they should kill him or leave him be, or if he's a threat at all, or if he's fine, and they end up electing to just leave him be. This doesn't make any sense unless it's symbolism for what's going on in the series. I think it is. That's my theory. That's my running theory right now. Maybe we'll get more answers as the series goes on. However, I really think that this story is just symbolic for the story of the Vita Carnis. The word cult activity, which we saw in the one headline, to me, maybe this is what's being implied with the little forest creatures, because they have a sort of triangular shape to them, and like a triangle is kind of associated with a cult symbol. So perhaps it is just symbolizing that there's cult activity. Maybe as the series goes on, these creatures use the magical creature for some nefarious purpose or something like that. And maybe that's the story of the Vita Carnis. Maybe that's what's going on. So far, like I said, tons of questions, no answers. This is all just theorization. Let me know if I'm like extremely off base with that. Like maybe you have a totally different interpretation. Let me know in the comments if you think so. Overall, as a series, this is extremely good and effective. Not a whole lot of like straight up jump scares. Of course, there's the one, and it is the jump scare to end all jump scares. But at the end of the day, what this is just a really creepy, like, sort of almost like an existentially terrifying, like, I have no idea what's going on, there's nothing you can do to stop it. The whole Monoliths thing, like, what is that? The mimics, that's horrifying, and they're everywhere where there are people. And you can't really tell. There's nothing you can do. Essentially, with the mimics, there's like nothing you can do. With the hosts, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you're going to do to stop whatever the monoliths want to do. The only creatures you can really fight against are like the trimmings, and they're docile. You don't even need to fight them. So there's like this hopelessness to it. Like, every creature has their own, like, here's how you defend yourself from it, but every time it's like, you know, good luck. Like, chances are you're not going to make it if you encounter one of these. It's like there's no end in sight and there's no reason for it, and it's just like, what is going on? In the next part of the series, we see kind of how people are living their lives in this universe, and that is something we'll go into in my next video. But for now, I think that'll do it. I hope I got everything. I think that's everything. So, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching. So when I posted my last video, I said in the video, thank you guys for getting me. We're almost at 300. And while editing the video, I had to put over that 300 plus, because by the time I had edited the whole video, I had gotten that many more subscribers. And by the time the video was posted, I had over 400 subs. And at the time of this video's posting, I am just about 50 short of 900. I have no idea what it'll be by the time the video's up. Probably pretty similar because it has slowed down exponentially. But all throughout this week, I've just been blown away by the view counts on my videos and by the number of subscribers I've gotten. It's insane to me. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. You're the real OGs, for real. Otherwise, that's all I got. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.